Let's get to the details of those stories now. A Ghana beyond aid, mere rhetoric or an achievable goal? At the risk of sounding repetitive, this phrase has featured consistently in President Akufo-Addo's speeches since he took over office a year ago. But how does the president intend to achieve that goal? Critics say a policy document and a clear-cut plan is missing in the conversation. What do you also have to say? Join the conversation by dropping your comment on our Facebook wall. And whilst you're at it, have a look at this report by my colleague Jojo Kobna. It is about where some Ghanaians stand on the Ghana Beyond Aid mantra and whether or not they are on the same page with President Akufo-Addo.
There is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
In spite of huge natural resources, Ghana still heavily relies on donor support to stay afloat. Perhaps the theme Ghana Beyond Aid is a good reminder and a good call on the country to be truly independent in all fronts.
The change in our fortunes will only happen when our economy improves. Since I became president, I've been advocating for a Ghana, indeed an Africa beyond aid. And I'm keen to have the support of all of us in this enterprise. Nobody needs to spell it out to us that the economic transformation we desire will not come through aid.
To the chairman of the People's National Convention, Bernard Mona, Ghana Beyond Aid is a great call, but needs strong policy to achieve that goal.
I see it more of a slogan, more of a rhetoric than any attempt to actualize it. There are no policies that have been rolled up for actualization. What is it to talk about when you say Ghana Beyond Aid? What are we doing as a people? What things is the president expecting citizens to do? In the absence of any framework, the talk of it is not sufficient to drive the agenda for Ghana Beyond Aid. It is a good slogan, it makes good sound bites, but in all honesty, there is no policy roll-up to support the statements that the president is making.
What about the thousands of Ghanaians who throng the Black Star Square and listen to the president? What does Ghana Beyond Aid mean to them?
Ghana Beyond Aid. I know I said Ghana Beyond Aid no kind. I said
I see, you know, Ghana Beyond Aid. I think they are now see changes from the Ghana. They have made Ghana right now. We are moving the highest forward. Now that we are seeing different things, because the way the president is doing
different things like what?
Okay, we see how the president is doing it because of fair shares and new things. I've seen Ghana has changed a lot of things, cleanliness and others.
Is that what is Ghana Beyond Aid?
Okay, as for the Ghana Beyond Aid, as for me, my understanding is they have made a new different jobs and other different ones. So I can see they are now getting to the Ghana Beyond Aid.
So Ghana Beyond Aid, how do you understand it?
I don't get any idea for it. I'm sorry, I don't get any idea for it.
You don't get any idea? Yeah. What about you? Ghana Beyond Aid. How do you Ghana Beyond Aid.
Ghana Beyond Aid.
Yes.
Actually, I don't understand that statement.
Ekuya Donko of the Ghana Freedom Party said although she carefully listened to the president, she did not understand what the president meant by Ghana Beyond Aid. If ordinary Ghanaians expected to work hard to support the country's vision don't get the message, then government communicators should perhaps find better ways of breaking it down.
We should make it honest.
So how does the government intend to get the people along to help them achieve what they want? I'll be speaking with the Deputy Information Minister, Kojo Opon-Kroma. But before that, usually people who belong to the same party share in a common ideology. But that may not necessarily be the case when it comes to Ghana Beyond Aid. Now, this is why I say that. Andrew Awuni is founder of the Center for Freedom and Accuracy. He's a member of the NPP. He's actually served in the previous NPP administration. Well, he has yet to be clear in his mind mind what exactly the Ghana Beyond Aid mantra is. He spoke on PM Express.
I've heard the president talk about Ghana Beyond Aid. What I'm not too sure about is it a project or it's a slogan? I don't know what it is yet. If it is Ghana Beyond Aid, is it a project? If it's a project, then it means we will have a time action plan to the project. Then we know that perhaps it's going to take us 20 years, 30 years, 50 years to achieve Ghana Beyond Aid. Or is it a proclamation? Is it a statement that we are making that we're beginning to see Ghana Beyond Aid, and then we are beginning to envision what it will look like to be on our own without any aid? Is that what we're talking about? Or is this just a slogan? I don't know what it is. I've heard it several times, but to be honest with you, I don't know exactly what it is. If it's a project, then we all need to be brought into the project so we can own the project. We can work together towards Ghana Beyond Aid. That project should be clearly spelled out. What are the steps? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Who are going to be involved? How relevant will Mr. Awuni be to this project? And what role am I going to play?
A clear plan will help us achieve, if it is an achievable goal in the first place. Well, let's talk a bit more about this. I'm joined on phone by Dr. Yao Graham. He is the coordinator of Third World Network Africa, a Pan-African research and advocacy organization. Deputy Minister for Information, Kojo Oponkruma, also joins us live from Parliament. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the show. Many thanks for your time this afternoon. Kojo, let me start with you. Ghana Beyond Aid. It's become a familiar sentence now, thanks to President Akufo-Addo. But it appears that a number of people are not really clear exactly what it is or what it is we're supposed to do with it or to do to achieve it.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that in these early days or in these early stages, as we promulgate this framework or this paradigm, this mindset of Ghana Beyond Aid, people are asking for more information on what does it mean, how do I play a part in it. It is actually that which we desire, and that's why on an occasion as important as our Independence Day, President Akufo-Addo spent a lot of time talking about this mindset, this framework, this paradigm or this approach. Now, Ghana Beyond Aid, as I have mentioned as a mindset or as an approach or a paradigm, if you listen to the president's speech properly, has about 4 major pillars. There is a revenue pillar, or perhaps let me define the concept. Essentially what the concept is that we as a nation, 61 years into our independence, need to not just say that we are politically independent, but we also have to get to a point where in terms of economics, we are economically strong enough so that the very important things that we as a country want to do, we have resources, adequate resources to deliver on them without necessarily having to resort on aid or to aid to deliver on them, or having to sometimes be forced to borrow recklessly before we're able to meet those obligations. And there are about 4 pillars if you pay attention to the president's speech as he outlined them yesterday. The first is the revenue pillar. The second is the expenditure pillar. The third is the financing pillar. And the fourth is what I would describe as the alternative use pillar. And if you just give me a few minutes to take your viewers through these pillars. On the revenue side, there are 2 types of revenue that this country requires: non-tax and then tax revenue. If you start off with the tax revenue side, you know, there's a benchmark to determine whether or not we are raising adequate resources to meet our obligations as a nation. Because if we are not, then we'll have to resort to aid and grants and some unhelpful borrowing arrangements before we're able to meet them. So on the tax side, you take, for example, our tax to GDP ratio. We are told by international development banks, the OECD among others, that a country of a status like ours in a lower middle income category should be having a tax to GDP ratio of somewhere between 20 to 25%. Today, our tax to GDP ratio is sitting around 15%. What that tells us is that about 8 to 10% of our GDP is not being taxed or is not being captured into the tax basket. Do we roll on more taxes or do we get more compliant even with the current taxes that we have? So you'll find that the policy position is to improve compliance. It may not necessarily be a new idea, but it is a pillar that needs to be executed. And so you find today we are doing things under tax stamp regime, under tax amnesty, trying to improve tax compliance so that when you get to tax revenue, you're able to get to optimal tax revenue. We have efforts at digitization that the Vice President has been talking about. It's aimed at improving how much revenue we can mobilize, at least on the tax side. Go on the non-tax side. On the non-tax side, you notice the President was talking a lot about, for example, value addition in some of the new resource areas we are going to look at, like bauxite, etc., through the Integrated Aluminium Industries Act that we are hoping to pass. On some of the old ones, like petroleum, we passed the Petroleum Revenue Management Act that we are trying to, may I say, implement fully to ensure that we get a bit more from petroleum resources than we got from gold. Gold arrangements, as I'm sure your other guests would tell you, were not very exciting for us. Take cocoa, for example, and some of our other products. We need to move into the value addition space so that we get a lot more in terms of the resource mobilization. And all of this fits under the revenue pillar. When you come to the expenditure pillar, for example, one of the first things that stands out.
Could I'll have you be a bit brief for me so that we're able to do a lot within the short period of time that we have. I have Mr. Graham on the line now. I'd like to take his thoughts about it, but I see the explanation that you're giving to the pillars that the President mentioned. But the bottom line and the point that we're raising here really is that people don't seem to understand it the same way you understand. They're not on the same page with you. And when I say you, I mean government. It doesn't strike you that way?
What we have to do is to spend a lot more time engaging in these conversations, spend more time interrogating the pillars, spend more time understanding so that we all know the part that we play and we fit into it. When the Americans say the American dream or creating a society of opportunities, it's a concept that needs to be consistently discussed, interrogated, so that various actors in the society see how they fit in see the part that they have to play.
You're talking about
people may not understand it today.
Kojo, you're talking about interrogating the concept, but it's been a year. The President has been saying it, like I said, it's quite repetitive in some of his speeches. So this is something you already know. Isn't it? Haven't you spent the whole year talking about something that people don't understand? Would you call it a failure on the part of your communication machinery?
Oh, no. We are getting into an exercise where hopefully today you'll give me time, next month, next week, next year. We have to continue having this conversation and getting the entire Ghanaian populace to understand it. This is not time-bound per se, that within 2 months we have to get everybody whipped in line on what Ghana Beyond Aid means. It's something we have to imbibe as a value across the Ghanaian society, and it will take time. I'm very happy that this conversation has come up today, for example. Let's spend more time on it so that we can interrogate it and get everybody to understand and know how to play their part.
Okay, could you please stay with us? Let me engage Mr. Graham. Dr. Graham, thank you very much for waiting for us this far. Do you, as a leader of a civil society organization, understand, as Kojo is explaining, as the Deputy Minister of Information is explaining, do you understand that this is what's required of you as part of civil society organization to help government achieve the Ghana Beyond Aid goal that it's set for itself?
I mean, I think, with all respect, that's probably the wrong question to pose. Because I mean, Kojo was trying to explain what the government means by its the various 4 pillars that it talks about. And I think you are right in saying that there ought to be more information. But more importantly, there ought to be clear policies, okay, which connect what's his name, the former deputy minister of information, the one you interviewed at first, who said, is it a project or is it
if you could speak up a bit for me, Dr. Graham.
The point that was raised by an earlier speaker who asked whether it's a project or it's a vision.
Right.
Now, I think as a vision, I think it's an important and positive statement, by the president. Why it is important, I think, ought to be explained more and more. I think it's good that leaders set out something which unites a number of elements.
Are you clear in your mind what it is? Because you're referring to Mr. Awuni.
When I take it with other things that the president has said, as I understand them analytically, I'm very clear what I think I understand what he's talking about, because he's talked about He's talked about industrialization. He's talked about value addition. He's talked about a number of things, which for me unite.
So you are clear in your mind.
Well, let me explain how I understand it, and also what I think is missing. Okay. I think what the president is saying is not controversial. I think it's an important point. Because at independence, one of the things Kumar said was that the black person is capable of managing his own affairs. This is the same point the president is making in contemporary times. Because aid has exerted too much influence on our policy choices compared to the amount of money that we get from donors, which has meant that the orientation of the country's development has been subordinated to their interests. So the president is saying we should make our own choices. Now, what those choices are is where it's in the details. Now, when Opon Nkrumah talks about the revenue pillar, the expenditure pillar, the financing pillar, I get a bit worried about, is it simply about the management of the public budget, or it is a development strategy? Because beyond aid must be a development strategy for the country, within which there are many others. Because basically, the lessons of history show that the point about industrialization, which the president has talked about, is a necessity. The thing about value addition is a necessity.
But what you're saying, and if I get you clear, is that it has to be a more comprehensive strategy.
Yeah. And also it has to be coherent.
Okay, let me find out from Kojo whether or not he can answer your question, the question that you've just posed right now. Kojo, you've heard Dr. Graham. He thinks that he's actually asking, is it just about the financial management as you've clearly spelled out, or is it a more, as he's saying, coherent and comprehensive development plan? Is it there? Is it tangible for people to see and actually follow through to make sure it is achieved?
And let me say good afternoon to Dr. Graham. And again, I beg of you to give us time so that we can explain what it is, and then we can judge whether people are understanding and even seeing their roles. For example, on the expenditure side, it's not just about managing the national expenditure budget, but there's a question about what are you using our money for, and how does it cut future dependence on aid? So are you using our expenditure to stimulate growth in sustainable sectors of the economy that on their own create jobs, that on their own transform their subsectors in the economy, that build a class of Ghanaians who do not become burdens in the future, but actually become contributors to our national kitty in the future. So you will find that in the details, for example, of the expenditure pillar, there are parts of it that talk about the fact that we have to shift our national expenditure from a lot of recurrent expenditure to investing into the things that literally transform the nature, A, of our economy, the nature, B, of our society, C, the nature of our people themselves. When you go to the financing side, you'll find out, for example, that there's a pillar, or under the financing pillar, there's a part that deals with finding arrangements for funding some of the major things we want to do without necessarily having to come or resort to the national accounts, as Dr. Graham was talking about. Indeed, yesterday, if you heard the president's speech, at a point, he talks about the fact that there are a number of things that we can do without resort either to a grant or to aid, but we can structure a development framework that ensures that there's money to pay for it, it's managed in a sustainable way, that doesn't really leave us at the beck and call of a grantor from some Western, or in this case, Eastern or Asian country.
Right.
In recent years, we've had to see sometimes a whole ministry, sometimes Flagstaff House or other big edifices be constructed as a gift by somebody. If we're talking of Ghana beyond aid, what is the framework or the arrangement that allows us to, for example, develop infrastructure in a manner that is not waiting for a grant from somebody, in a manner that is not restricted based on the limitations of our resource envelope as a country, but through an arrangement that allows us to find the capital from elsewhere, the expertise, both in Ghana and elsewhere, and develop this and have it managed on a sustainable basis to deliver value to the people of Ghana. So Dr. Grema's point is spot on, and you will find a bit of it outlined under some of the pillars as I was seeking to mention earlier.
So back to the question, is there a comprehensive, coherent plan, national development plan that's seeking to take us there, Ghana beyond aid?
You will find that as a constitution requires every president to table his program for economic and social development, we have tabled ours. We didn't even wait for 2 years. In the very first year, that 4-year document contains programs under each of these pillars that I have mentioned that will begin to help us move towards that mindset or that timeline of Ghana beyond aid. But I do get the question that people are asking, that can we find one big document titled Ghana beyond aid that puts all of these together so that somebody can pick and read and look at it from that point of view? And I think that is not a bad request to make.
Okay. Okay.
I don't think that that's a bad request. But if today we haven't put such a document out, it doesn't mean that under each of these pillars, as I'm mentioning, you will not find programs well articulated and financed that are clearly targeted as getting us to that point where we are economically and financially self-dependent in delivering on these.
Okay, well, my final question to both of you gentlemen. Dr. Graham, does this answer suffice for you? And if it does, what's the way forward in your view?
Quick one. First of all, I think, as I said, I see many, positives in the vision. When I talk about coherence, I'm not talking about a document sitting there. I'm talking about coherence of policy and practice. You see, if you take Ghana beyond aid as a summary of our relationship with the external world, aid is an important vector for debilitating our development choices and subordinating into other people's logic. Aid is a source of leakages from our economy. So the value that we create is not available to be reinvested. Now, the larger question of leakages is very important. So how you manage your financial sector either allows financial sector actors to drain a lot of resources. And this has become a big issue since the global financial crisis. Everybody is coming to invest in the global south because they can take a lot more out. The president, when he spoke at the you talk about illicit financial outflows from Africa. It goes, and so how do we manage leakages through trade policy? Because if you don't have policy that allows, say, some space for your domestic enterprise to grow, and we've been making this point all the time, no country has developed without an industrial policy which incorporates trade policy instruments as a key part. Support for local enterprise. So if you end up with a banking sector where domestic ownership of the banking sector is less than 10%, then even the lending policy has control. Is that the kind of coherence I'm talking about?
You're talking
because
about.
On the continent today, I think there's a unanimity about structural transformation with equity, with all the pillars the president talks about. You look at Agenda 2063, it has that. You take key frameworks like the African Mining Vision, it has that. You take the accelerated industrialization development for Africa, it has that. The justification for the continental free trade area has that, even though there are problems with CFT. So I'm talking about policy coherence, because you cannot be seeking to create the kind of economy that the president talks about, whilst, for example, some people in his government may be interested, as the MPP was, in the previous time, and one has heard in more recent time, interested in turning Ghana into a tax haven, where people want to pay taxes, come and hide their money and so on. So that's the kind of coherence I'm talking about. For the document, and so that has implications really for different things being done in different, sectors of the economy. And in that area, I think there's a bit of incoherence. But the heart of the president's strategic vision, I think, is an important point which we need to say it's the vision for the times. But there's a tension between that vision and some
Okay.
The NPP as a party at hand. And to be interested to see how they square it.
Quick one, Dr. Graham, before you go, and that'll be my very final question. I was asking about the way forward. We've spoken to a few people, and it appears they don't even understand. Is it an issue of communication barrier, or is it just a matter of, let's say, the choice of language? I mean, is there a way you could suggest that government goes about, getting the people to buy into this whole idea of a Ghana beyond aid, because they don't even seem to understand the very basics?
Well, as I said, it is how the policies express themselves in people's everyday lives. So somebody was asking me, somebody asked, so how do we, say, fund our health sector if we are not going to be dependent on aid? Well, we've had a pharmaceutical industry which has not had a lot of breathing space because of some of the relations I have. And also, there's an important dimension, you see, of this whole thing is that to work, I'm not hearing the president yet articulate clearly the regional dimension of the policy. Because we are talking about industrialization where you need to be looking at clusters, for example, in different areas and so on and so forth. Okay. So people should see that these policies are going to transform our lives. Okay. Are we going to have policies where we're adding value to, how do we see the value addition in agriculture so that people are not coming to live in shanty towns in Accra, but they have jobs which give them dignity? Now, you need to build a constituency for the policy beyond announcing it.
Right, Doc, thank you very much for your time. Building a constituency for the policy, Kojo, that's where I'm going to end with you. Going forward, what is the communication strategy?
Just about 30 seconds.
Please.
The point Dr. Graham makes is solid, because now when you introduce this big picture, the next phase, after we've gone through a process of getting people excited and whipped up into it, is now to challenge various constituencies to fit with us what this means for their constituency. So like trade, for example, what does this mean for trade? What does this mean for foreign policy? What does this mean for education? What does it mean for all of these things, as Dr. Graham talks about? So again, let us not pretend that this is something that must be answered in a day. It is going to be a generation-long thing that we have to be working on collectively to get to that end.
So is there going to be a communication plan that perhaps breaks it down for everybody else to understand? Maybe it's an issue of language barrier. Maybe it's a communication strategy that's not quite straightened.
Indeed, there is, and you will shortly see its rollout even on your own platform.
Oh, we look forward to it. Kojo, thank you very much for your time. Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah is a Deputy Information Minister. Dr. Yao Graham is with the Third World Network Africa. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.